The afternoon light sliced through the blinds, cutting across Henry's desk in sharp, dusty beams. 68 years of gravity pulled at his face as he stared at the envelope. Foreign stamps. No return address. Just his name and the house number in careful block letters. Henry's weathered fingers hesitated over the seal. Something about the weight of it felt wrong. He ran his thumb across the corner, then tore it open with a single motion. Inside was a photograph, torn jaggedly down the middle. Just half an image, showing a dirt road, a tree line, and the edge of what might have been a person. The paper was faded, yellowed at the edges. 30, maybe 40 years old. He turned it over. Nothing written on the back. Just that torn edge, like a question mark. Henry set it down, his hand trembling slightly. The house creaked around him, empty except for the ghost he'd brought home from a war most people had forgotten. The garden outside needed water. It always needed water these days. Henry stood at the window, looking at the struggling tomato plants and the rosemary that had gone woody from neglect. Like everything else in his life, it survived without thriving. Main Street was 4 blocks away, but Henry rarely walked there anymore. The town had changed. Or maybe he had. The locals knew him as the quiet man in the faded blue house, the one who nodded politely but never stopped to chat. They didn't know about the medals in his dresser drawer or the nightmares that still woke him at 3 in the morning. He'd been 22 when they shipped him overseas. A lifetime ago. Different wars, different enemies, but always the same mud and blood and fear. He'd gone with 3 friends from his hometown. Only he had come back. Henry made coffee, strong and black. The photograph sat on the table while he drank, that torn edge drawing his eye again and again. Something about it pulled at his memory, the angle of the tree line, the particular red of the dirt. Places blurred together after all these years, but this one scratched at something deep in his mind. He was on his second cup when he noticed the slip of paper that had fallen from the envelope. 5 words, typed on a strip of white paper. You know what comes next. Henry's coffee went cold as he stared at those words. That night, he dreamed of Quang Tri Province. The jungle heat. The weight of his pack. The way sweat ran down the back of his neck and soaked his shirt. In the dream, he was walking point again, scanning the trees for movement, listening for sounds that didn't belong. His squad moved behind him, Decker with his Brooklyn accent, Martinez singing under his breath, Willis checking his watch every 5 minutes like it would somehow speed up their tour. Henry woke gasping, the sheets twisted around his legs. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Same as always. The next morning, he called the only person who might understand. Taylor. The voice on the other end was gruff, suspicious. It's Henry. Henry Mercer. A pause. Mercer? Jesus Christ. It's been what, 15 years? Something like that. Henry cleared his throat. I got something in the mail. A photograph. Half a photograph, actually. And you're calling me about this at 7 in the morning because... It's from over there. Vietnam. I'm sure of it. The silence stretched between them. You still there, Taylor? Yeah. Taylor's voice had changed, gone quiet. You're not the only one. Henry's grip tightened on the receiver. What do you mean? Doherty got one last month. Called me about it. Half a picture, no explanation. Doherty's alive? I thought. Liver cancer got him 3 weeks ago. Taylor cleared his throat. Listen, there's a few of us left. From the old unit. We meet up sometimes, have a beer. Maybe you should come by. Henry hadn't seen any of them in years. After coming home, he tried to bury everything, the memories, the friendships, all of it. He'd changed towns, changed jobs, tried to change himself. I don't know, Taylor. Sunday, 2 o'clock. McGinney's on Elm Street. Taylor hung up before Henry could refuse. The photograph sat on his kitchen table for 3 days. Henry would find himself standing over it, trying to conjure the missing half through sheer force of will. That torn edge became an obsession, a cliff his mind kept approaching and retreating from. Sunday came with rain that drummed against the windows and turned the garden soil dark. Henry put on his one good shirt and the jacket he saved for funerals. The photograph went into his pocket, a weight against his chest. McGinney's was dim and smelled of old beer and cigarettes. 4 men sat at a corner table, their conversation stopping when Henry pushed through the door. He recognized Taylor immediately, balder, heavier, but with the same watchful eyes. The others took longer. Williams with his crooked nose. Jennings, who'd lost his left arm below the elbow. And Russo, whose face had somehow remained boyish despite the gray hair. Holy shit, Russo said. It's Mercer. They made room for him. A beer appeared. Questions came about his life, his health, the years between then and now. Henry answered in short sentences, watching their faces, looking for signs of the boys they'd been and the men they'd become. "So you got one too," Williams finally said, nodding at the bulge in Henry's jacket pocket. Henry pulled out the photograph and placed it on the table. The others leaned in. Same paper. Same era. Jennings reached into his own pocket and produced his half-photograph. It showed a group of soldiers standing in a line. Their faces were blurred by time and the quality of the old camera, but the uniforms were unmistakable. "Doherty got one too," Taylor said. "And Michaels." "Michaels is still around?" Henry asked. "Nursing home in Tucson. His mind's going, but his daughter says he went crazy when that photo came. Started screaming about Quang Nam." Williams pulled out his own fragment. "This one showed the edge of a building, maybe a hut or a barracks. I figured it was some sick joke. But seeing all these pieces..." "It's the same photo," Russo said quietly. "Torn into pieces and sent to each of us." They laid the fragments on the table, trying to arrange them into something coherent. Edges that should have matched didn't quite line up. Pieces were still missing. "Doherty's daughter might have his," Taylor said. "And God knows where Michaels ended up." "What about the note?" Henry asked. "Did you all get notes?" They had. 5 words each, different for every man. "Mine said, 'The debt remains unpaid,'" Williams said. "Time doesn't erase what happened," from Jennings. "They're waiting on the other side." Russo's voice cracked slightly. "The truth will find you all," Taylor finished. Henry placed his slip next to the others. "You know what comes next." The table went quiet. The bartender called last orders, though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and unfamiliar. "It's about Song Tra," Taylor finally said. "Has to be." The name hit Henry like a physical blow. Song Tra. A village that wasn't on any map anymore. A place he'd spent 40 years trying to forget. "We agreed never to talk about that," Williams said, his voice low and dangerous. "Someone's talking about it now," Taylor countered. "Someone who was there." Henry's mind filled with fragments, the smell of smoke, the sound of shouting, the weight of his rifle. He'd been a different person then. They all had been. "I need to go," he said, standing abruptly. The room seemed to tilt around him. "Mercer," Taylor began. "I'll be in touch." Henry gathered his piece of the photograph and walked out into the fading afternoon light. That night, he dreamed of Song Tra again. The village had been a suspected Viet Cong stronghold. Their orders had been to secure it, detain any fighting-age males, and search for weapons caches. Simple on paper. They'd arrived at dawn, the mist still clinging to the ground. No shots fired as they approached. The village had seemed deserted at first, but then people began emerging from huts, old men, women, children. No young men. That had been the first warning sign. What happened next came to Henry in disjointed flashes. A shout. A sudden movement. Someone firing. Then everyone firing. Chaos. Smoke. Screaming. And afterward, the silence. The terrible silence as they stood among the bodies. Henry woke with his heart hammering against his ribs. 4:30 in the morning. The dream clung to him like sweat. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table, the torn photograph before him. In the gray pre-dawn light, he studied it again, the dirt road, the tree line, the edge of a figure. And then he saw what he'd missed before. In the background, almost lost in the grain of the old photo, the faint outline of smoke rising. Village smoke. Henry's hands began to shake. Later that morning, he drove to the local library. The elderly librarian helped him navigate the microfiche archives, pulling newspapers from 1971 and 1972. Henry scanned headlines about peace talks, casualty counts, protests back home. He found nothing about Song Tra. The village had been erased from history as thoroughly as it had been erased from the earth. On his way home, Henry stopped at a small house on Maple Street. Taylor answered the door in his undershirt, looking unsurprised. "I figured you'd be by," he said, stepping aside to let Henry in. The living room was cluttered with military memorabilia, shadow boxes of medals, framed photographs, a folded flag in a triangular case. Taylor had embraced his past rather than running from it. "I need to know who's sending these," Henry said without preamble. Taylor sighed. "I've been making calls, tracking down anyone who might know something. There's not many of us left from that day. And nothing concrete. But I found this." Taylor went to a desk and pulled out a worn leather journal. It belonged to Carpenter. Carpenter died at Song Tra. That's what we told everyone. Taylor's eyes held Henry's. "But you and I both know that's not exactly true." Henry took the journal with reluctant hands. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed. Inside, Carpenter's neat handwriting filled page after page, dates, locations, observations. Toward the end, the entries grew shorter, more fragmented. The last one was dated the day before Song Tra. "I don't understand," Henry said. "How did you get this?" "His sister sent it to me about 10 years ago. Found it in a footlocker in her attic. She thought I might want it for sentimental reasons." Taylor laughed without humor. Little did she know. Henry flipped through the pages, scanning entries. Carpenter had been their lieutenant, fresh out of officer training and eager to prove himself. Too eager, as it turned out. "There's something else," Taylor said. He went to a cabinet and returned with a manila envelope. This came with Doherty's effects. "His daughter gave it to me at the funeral." Inside was another fragment of the photograph. This piece showed more of the dirt road and what appeared to be a line of men kneeling. "Jesus," Henry whispered. "Yeah." Taylor took a deep breath. "I think I know what the whole picture shows." "I think we all do, deep down." Henry's throat went dry. "The execution." Taylor nodded slowly. "Carpenter ordered it. We carried it out." The memory surfaced like a drowned body, the row of captured men kneeling in the dirt, hands bound behind their backs. Carpenter standing behind them, his service pistol drawn. The rest of the squad forming a firing line. "But there were 6 prisoners," Henry said. "And only 5 of us have received photographs." Taylor's eyes met his. "That's what's been keeping me up at night." Henry returned home with Carpenter's journal and a weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He sat on his porch as evening fell, watching shadows lengthen across his neglected garden. The journal entries revealed a man coming apart at the seams. Carpenter had written about firefights and ambushes with clinical detachment, but as his tour progressed, paranoia crept in. He began seeing enemies everywhere, trusting no one. The Vietnamese civilians were all potential Viet Cong in his eyes. Every village a threat. The entry before Song Tra was chilling in its brevity. "Intel suggests VC presence. We'll clear it tomorrow. No mistakes this time. No mistakes." Henry closed his eyes, remembering. The intel had been flimsy at best, a rumor from another unit, nothing solid. But Carpenter had been convinced. And when the first shots were fired, Henry still didn't know who fired first. Everything had spiraled out of control. Afterward, they'd found weapons in some of the huts. Enough to justify the operation on paper, but not enough to justify what happened to the prisoners. 6 men, captured while trying to flee. Young men, probably VC or at least sympathizers. Carpenter had ordered them executed on the spot. No trial, no processing. Just a line in the dirt and a firing squad. Henry had been part of that line. They all had been. Following orders. He opened his eyes and looked at the fragments of the photograph spread before him. The picture was starting to take shape, the road, the kneeling men, the soldiers standing behind them. One piece was still missing. The piece that would show Henry himself, rifle raised. Or would it? A terrible thought struck him. What if the missing piece didn't show him in the firing line? What if it showed him among the kneeling men? The 6th prisoner, the one whose face had been covered with a hood, the one who had been shaking so badly that Henry had felt a moment of pity before Carpenter gave the order to fire. Henry's hands trembled as he gathered the photograph pieces. In his mind, 2 realities competed, the memory of standing in that line, rifle in hand, and a new, terrible possibility that it had been someone else who looked like him, someone whose face he never saw. The next morning, Henry called Taylor. "I need to see Michaels," he said without greeting. "His daughter won't let anyone visit. Says it agitates him too much. Then I'll go to Doherty's grave. Or track down Carpenter's sister. Someone knows the truth." Taylor was quiet for a moment. "The truth won't change what happened, Mercer." "Maybe not. But I need to know which side of that line I was on." "You know which side you were on." "We all do." "Do we?" Henry's voice cracked. "I've been having these dreams. Memories, maybe. But they don't match up. Sometimes I'm holding the rifle. Sometimes I'm looking down the barrel." Another long silence. "Meet me at the VA cemetery." 2 hours. The cemetery stretched out in neat rows, white headstones catching the midday sun. Taylor waited by the entrance, a folder tucked under his arm. "I made some calls," he said as Henry approached. "Pulled some strings with people who still owe me favors." They walked in silence past rows of identical markers. So many wars represented here. So many young men who never grew old. "Carpenter didn't die at Song Tra," Taylor finally said. That was the official story, but it wasn't true. Henry nodded. He'd suspected as much after reading the journal. He had a breakdown after the executions. Started saying we'd killed the wrong men. That one of them was an American POW. Taylor stopped walking. The brass covered it up, sent him stateside for psychiatric evaluation. He killed himself 3 months later. And the sixth prisoner? The one with the hood. Taylor handed Henry the folder. These came from classified files. Someone's going to catch hell for leaking them, but I figured we deserved to know. Inside were photocopied reports, witness statements, and a complete version of the photograph. Henry's hands shook as he looked at it. The image showed exactly what he feared: 6 men kneeling in the dirt, a line of soldiers behind them. Henry stood among those soldiers, his young face grim and unreadable. The sixth prisoner, the one with the hood, was slumped forward as if already dead. "Turn the page," Taylor said quietly. The next document was a medical examiner's report. The sixth prisoner had been identified posthumously as Lieutenant James Harper, an American pilot shot down 3 months earlier and presumed captured. He had been beaten severely before his death, his face unrecognizable. "We killed one of our own," Henry whispered. Carpenter knew. That's why he broke down. Taylor took back the folder. The official story became that Harper died in captivity. His family was told he was tortured to death by the VC. Easier to accept than the truth. Henry felt the world tilt beneath his feet. All these years, he'd carried the weight of Song Tra, the civilians caught in the crossfire, the executed prisoners. But this was worse. So much worse. "Who's sending the photographs?" he asked. After all this time, who would know? Harper had a younger brother. He joined up right after the funeral, ended up in intelligence. Had access to classified files. Taylor looked away. He died last year. Lung cancer. His will instructed his lawyer to mail certain items on the anniversary of his brother's death, which is when these started arriving. Taylor nodded. He wanted us to know that someone remembered. That someone knew. They stood among the graves, 2 old men carrying the weight of actions taken by boys playing at being soldiers. Around them, the cemetery was peaceful, the rows of white markers stretching toward the horizon like the promise of absolution. "What do we do now?" Henry asked. "What we've always done. We live with it." That night, Henry sat at his kitchen table with all the pieces of the photograph arranged before him. The complete image was a testament to man's capacity for cruelty, for mistake, for tragedy. 6 kneeling men, 5 Vietnamese and 1 American in disguise. 6 soldiers standing behind them, young men following orders they should have questioned. Henry thought about the life he'd lived since that day. The quiet house, the neglected garden, the years spent alone. He'd come home from the war and built walls around himself, keeping the world at a distance, keeping the past locked away. But the past had found him anyway. It always did. In the morning, Henry drove to the hardware store and bought seeds, fertilizer, and new gardening tools. He spent the day clearing weeds and turning soil, his aging back protesting, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. As the sun began to set, he stood looking at his work. The garden wasn't beautiful yet, but it had potential. It could grow into something worthwhile. Inside, he took the photograph and Carpenter's journal and placed them in a wooden box along with his medals and the letters he'd written home during the war. Not hidden anymore, but not defining him either. Just part of a life that contained both terrible mistakes and the long, quiet aftermath of trying to live with them. The evening light cast long shadows across his floor as Henry sat in his chair by the window, watching darkness settle over his garden. Tomorrow, he would plant the seeds. Some would grow and some wouldn't. That was the nature of things. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of distant thunder. Rain was coming. The garden would welcome it.